I'm going to read a poem called An Oration Upon the Most Recent Death of Christopher Columbus. This poem was written the night after Columbus Day in 1992. And the way it came to be written is of some interest. A young woman named Dina Alfano, who was the president of the Italian-American Student Union at Brooklyn College, came to me and she said, "Professor Viscusi, what are we going to do?" I said, "Well, what's the matter?" And she said, "Well, there's a group called Familia Latina, which is an umbrella group of all the Latino clubs on campus, has announced a Day of Dignity for the 14th of October to protest the celebration of the 500th anniversary of the arrival of Christopher Columbus in the New World. What are we going to do about that?" So I said, "Well, listen, why don't we go see them? And if we speak really nicely to them, maybe they'll let us protest with them." And she said, "What do you mean protest with them?" I said, "Well, look at it this way. Their parents, their grandparents, came to the United States because they were poor and they were looking to make a better life. Columbus came to America working for the King of Spain and the Medici Bank. Now, which one of them do you have more in common with? Why did your grandparents or your parents come here?" So she said, "Oh, that's an interesting point of view." So we did take part. We went to see them. They were very pleased to have us, and we took part in the Day of Dignity. And I wrote this poem originally to be performed then. And since that time, I have performed it many, many places around the United States and in Italy, very often with music, which I'm not going to do today. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just the first part. It has 3 parts. And what this poem does is address the complicated feelings of an Italian-American intellectual at that moment. That is to say, we understood perfectly well what the Latinos and the Native Americans and the African Americans were complaining about. After all, Columbus was the beginning of a very unhappy chapter in the lives of all of those peoples, on the one hand. On the other hand, we were Italian Americans. Our grandparents, or our parents as it may be, or our great-grandparents, had come here at a time when Americans wanted no part of Italians. And Italians didn't want much part of us either. And all of the great Italian heroes, Leonardo, Michelangelo, all those kinds of characters, had already been bought up by the Morgans and the Rockefellers, so they didn't belong to us. The only one that somehow we managed to plant our flag in was Christopher Columbus. He was the first immigrant. That's what a lot of people like to say in those days. So, I mean, there was even a point in the 19th century when they tried to make him a saint. So now all of a sudden, from having been a great hero, he was nothing. It was hard for us to stomach, even though we could understand why they felt that way. So this poem is about those complicated feelings. That's the background. I found Christopher Columbus hiding in the ashtray. "What are you doing there, if you please?" "Nobody smokes," he said. "Leave me alone." We used to wear a St. Christopher medal. It was for driving in the car. Then they said, "There is no St. Christopher, get rid of the medals." And we had to fly in airplanes without the protection of this non-existent saint. Plenty of people were scared of flying without St. Christopher. And yet they fly. We will learn to get along without Columbus, whom we used to love so well. There's McDonald's in Columbus, but Cologne has gone to hell. There's an awful smell where he must dwell. We will live without Columbus, whom we used to love so well. The fact is, Columbus Day will go the way of the dinosaur along with everything else. Meanwhile, what about Garibaldi, who was fighting for the poor of Italy, but after the revolution lived to see the rich steal Italy and rob the poor, selling them to labor gangs in Suez, shipping them to New York to dig subways in exchange for cheap American grain they brought back in the empty ships? The Italians went to America in steerage. That means they slept down below, all in one room, seasick for weeks. Another room would carry wheat the other way. The Italians didn't know where they were going. When they got there, the people spit at them. And Garibaldi lived to see all this begin to happen. And that was his reward for helping the rich steal Italy. He should have come to New York to fight in the Civil War, they asked him. And then he could have marched in the Columbus Day Parade. The Americans loved Columbus in those days. He was the right kind of Italian. Not like these dirty Dagos and Guineas and Wops. Stick you as soon as look at you. They carry shivs in their pants, the brown-eyed bastard Italians. The ice cream men, stilettos up their sleeves, handing your daughter the big vanilla. With the handlebar mustache Italians. Fixing the races at the track can get your girls. They'd run the numbers. And killed Danny Shea, the Dago did, for a dirty look and 20 quid. The Americans preferred Columbus. Our man, who wore a telescope in his pants, who bought America from the Indians and gave it to the bankers. They named 60 or 70 cities and towns Columbus. Columbia, a university, a country. In 1893, they called the World's Fair Columbian. Columbian meaning forward-looking, inventive, not afraid of fools and bigots. In those days, they would sick Columbus on the priests. They'd have a play in which the Inquisition said to Columbus, "The earth is flat. It says so right here in this book of theology." And Columbus would stand there all smug like Galileo, while the priests competed to see which of them could say the dumbest thing. People loved these plays in a Protestant country where they were afraid of priests because they hated them, and found that they hated priests because they were afraid of them. This particular logical slave bracelet often called itself the history of science. Nowadays, of course, this history of science includes a lot more chapters than it had 100 years ago. In those days, they never heard of Auschwitz. They never heard of Hiroshima. They never thought someone could kill Lake Erie or cause the disappearance of thousands of species, the most beautiful creatures in creation, butterflies bluer than night, now only memories. Cats that can jump 100 feet, forgotten, except by a few historians of extinction. So, of course, it's no longer so wonderful to be the patron saint of science. Italians are a family people. Not as in some political speech, but as in the caves of desolate Matese. Family people since the days of Visigoths and Roman legionaries. Families protecting their own from the soldiers and the police. Even their so-called criminals. Even their real criminals. Because who were the soldiers? They were worse than criminals. They were foreign soldiers no one was watching. They came where they came and they took what they liked. People used to fight over Columbus. The Spaniards said he was Spanish. In 1940, Salvador de Madariaga published a beautiful book proving Colon was and had to have been Jewish. But came the quincentenary, nobody wanted Columbus except the Italians. They sat in their kitchens and said, he was ours when he was rich and lovely, so he has to be ours tomorrow. Otherwise, what are we anyway when the foreign soldiers come back? So I found Columbus hiding in the ashtray. So I brought him a little soup. I would sit next to him reading a book until he fell asleep. It was the house arrest that befalls even good people when they grow old and cannot do anything. He's useless now, but he's still yours.